The great tradition is Avatar Adi Da's phrase for indicating, in his words, quote, the common wisdom inheritance of humankind, unquote. The whole point of studying what I call God's great tradition of global wisdom is not simply about becoming studious scholars of different cultural texts or traditional views, but to be motivated to do ego-transcending spiritual practices, sadhana, and to engage in real SATSANG with a genuine adept guru. As Ken Wilber once succinctly announced, quote, the only major purpose of a book on mysticism should be to persuade the reader to engage in mystical practice, unquote. We must realize for ourselves what our wisest ancestors have also realized. There is God only God. We must discover our innate Buddha nature by whatever name, the divine reality that is always already the case, alive and present as radiant, transcendental, conscious light, as Adi Da says. Therefore, we are all called, as the human race, to thoroughly study and listen to the sacred voices and spiritual confessions in this great tradition of humankind, which is why Adi Da implores his devotees and everyone to, quote, go to school with the great tradition, unquote, in order to serve our spiritual growth. In this short video, let's review some of the advantages gained from viewing all of the world's religious traditions as one grand, great tradition of human spirituality and wisdom. 1. The great tradition appreciates the development of all traditions and tribes set within the 7 stages of life model, encircling the globe during the entire course of human history. The great tradition sees human history as a global history of one human race. Thus it is our global inheritance, or common wisdom inheritance, as a born, living human being, no matter what culture you were born in. Study of the great tradition teaches us to preserve and revere nature and the earth as the living embodiment of spirit itself, a divine creation that must be protected, honored, and served. The great tradition, as a whole, provides wisdom that transcends the limitations of each historical era and their cultural and regional prejudices. The great tradition transcends religious provincialism, thus generating cultural and religious tolerance to provide the foundation for a united global culture based on genuine spiritual understanding. The great tradition of global wisdom also counters scientific materialism and Western flatland reductionism by showing us a hierarchy or holarchy of human development grounded in a spectrum of mysticism, from prophets to shamans to yogis to saints to sages to siddhas to avatars. Study and embodiment of the great tradition in today's modern world integrates Eastern Enlightenment or mysticism with Western Enlightenment or science and democracy or the world-centric recognition of human rights. The great tradition of global wisdom counters the egoic tendency towards religious or mythic cultism by transcending the errors and liabilities of the earlier stages of life, 1 through 4, and in evolving or developing the transpersonal state stages of awareness, 4 through 7, ultimately revealing divine enlightenment. Study of the great tradition as a whole minimizes the negative effects on the human spirit gained by living in a modern secular society that nevertheless is necessary for people to cultivate religious choice and freedom of worship based upon personal preference or one's traditional religious inheritance. Study of the great global wisdom tradition allows the Western mind to receive Eastern wisdom and vice versa, so that a comprehensive understanding of the entire spectrum of human consciousness can thus fully emerge. Consequently, this promotes an integral theory or integral vision of reality grounded in and promoting a genuine global world culture. Study of the great tradition resist the secularizing trends of our modern and postmodern society, thus addressing the fundamentalist and anti-scientific fringes of institutional religions. Study of the great tradition counters sectarianism or tribalism and scientific reductionism, leading to a more comprehensive and inclusive or integral orientation that fosters the embracing of reality as a whole, including all of its levels and dimensions and spheres of existence, from the physical to biological to mental to spiritual, etc. Study of the great tradition of global wisdom overcomes the culture of materialism, consumerism, and the battle of capitalism versus communism by embracing them all within the larger perspective of divine enlightenment or God realization that cultivates and cares for all human beings in any society or culture. The great tradition of global wisdom recognizes the inherent freedom of the human spirit beyond any cultural limitation or boundary. Study of the great tradition discriminates spirituality from fanaticism, intolerance, and mythic thinking. Awareness of the great global tradition, incorporating every culture and religious tradition, creates a culture of tolerance, in Adi Da's words. Study of the great tradition encourages the ultimate development of human growth, that is, the evolution of consciousness to divine enlightenment, from infancy to God realization, from babies to Buddhas, from a child to Christ consciousness. The great tradition reveals the importance of enlightenment and true God realization as the epitome or pinnacle of human potential, both individually and collectively. True spiritual life and the higher stages of life is revealed by studying the entire great tradition, not by any one single tradition or religion. The great tradition of global wisdom offers a divine library or comprehensive bibliography showing all of the stages of life, transcending any one tradition or any one text. Adi Da calls this approach and collection the basket of tolerance. Education in the great tradition helps create a preparatory foundation for authentic spiritual practice, or sadhana, as well as how to engage in a genuine relationship, or satsang, with authentic adept realizers and genuine siddha gurus. Study of the great tradition reveals the significance and indispensable process of guru yoga and satsang. Study of the great tradition reveals the importance and power and necessity of adept gurus and guru yoga as spirit transmitters, and how they have been the root source of all religious and esoteric spiritual traditions throughout world history and in every culture. The great tradition must be presented in an atmosphere of free exchange with an absence of racial or cultural prejudice. The great tradition encourages access to all possible forms of information available to all people possible, thus overcoming information poverty and misinformation by remedying the information gap between the educated and uneducated, the wealthy and the poor, the developed nations and undeveloped nations. The great tradition introduces the higher culture of spiritual life, thus supporting the development of all human potential to include the transpersonal stages of mysticism. The study of the great tradition introduces the higher culture of spiritual life, thus supporting the development of human potential to include the transpersonal stages of mysticism. Embodying the perennial wisdom of the great tradition, as taught by the world's awakened adepts, creates a person who is alive with peace of mind and bodily equanimity, a heart practicing love and compassion in all relations, while living in whole body communion with the divine ground or God, thus creating a whole human being, woman or man. Study of the great tradition encourages us to love and protect life itself as a living spiritual reality, including the protection of all humankind. As our list of advantages to using the great tradition shows, there are many benefits to be gained from the universal global wisdom we have all inherited from our wisest ancestors from past generations. It is the wisdom of the ages, after all, one that has been bequeathed to us from our most beloved and evolved souls. Nevertheless, every generation must make anew its commitment to understand and access this storehouse of spiritual knowledge. Today, with mass communication at an all-time high, such as with the internet and smartphones, coupled with the incredible proliferation of sacred translations circulating the earth more than at any other time in human history, we now have a far greater advantage and responsibility than any generation before us. So please, as Adi Da wisely suggests, quote, go to school with the great tradition of humankind, unquote.